Hi guys, welcome to Money Theory. In today's video, we're going to talk about the State Controller Office, the auditor for state funding and expenses. This is relevant to talk about because elections are coming up, and it's important to know how your tax dollars are spent.
First, what does the controller do? The controller is California's chief fiscal officer. He or she acts as the state's independent financial watchdog, pays the state's bills, helps oversee California's two largest public pension funds, and serves on more than 70 state boards and committees.
Auditing means that they are checking and making sure that the tax dollars are spent at the local and state level free of fraud, waste, and abuse. I'll provide this link in the description below. Since 2015 of January, the Controller's Audit Program has identified $7.3 billion in waste. And important to know is that this is the one position independent of the administration and legislature, which means that it is nonpartisan. Also, another thing to check out is Open Fiscal website. Click on Explore Expenditures and you'll see something like this. Here's the annual spending summary, and you can see how the money from the government is spent and allocated. You can see a large portion is in education, labor development, and human and health services. Also, important thing to know is that fraud is behind closed doors. All your tax money is collected annually, and you don't get a direct voice in how it's spent or get updates on every expense. The lawmakers and the government agencies just see a large pool of billions of dollars, and they get tempted to just waste it. Many lawmakers also just work for their donors and special interests instead of for you. This is a graph from 2015 and showing how much money that they get. For example, about $900 billion from wages and salaries, and smaller amounts are from business income and from capital gains. And here's a quick review of the various amounts of fraud that California has been facing. Notoriously, the EDD program was a victim of fraud at $32 billion. Also, the PPP Paycheck Protection Program has been wasting about $80 billion. And then the high-speed train from San Francisco to LA, it was initially projected to cost $34 billion, but recently the estimated costs are at $100 billion. The two candidates for the main election are Malia Cohen and Lanhee Chen. And here's a good video to get an idea of who your candidates are. I'll put the link in the description below.
Here.
You are a Democrat.
I am.
And you worked on the Democratic Central Committee and are well known to everybody from Gavin Newsom on down from your time here in San Francisco. So one of the arguments that your opponent is making is that you would be a lapdog, that in other words, that it's harder to audit and be tough on your friends who are in control in Sacramento. So how do you respond to that?
I think that he might be projecting. It might be difficult for him to be on tough on his friends, because remember, Mr. Chen is a Republican, but a Trump Republican. And we're watching these hearings now.
What makes you say that?
A Trump Republican?
Yeah.
Oh, because he has lauded and supported Donald Trump's judicial nominees to the Supreme Court, the same jurists that struck down Roe v. Wade. He's got,
Although he says he's pro-choice.
He says he's pro-choice, but only after the primary. And the real question is where are you when it comes to Prop 1? California voters are going to go to the ballot in the next 3 weeks. They're going to throw down their ballot, and Prop 1 is on target to pass. And I believe that Mr. Chen is out of step with what Californians want.
Is that really, how could a controller affect either the availability of abortion or funding of abortion services? It doesn't seem to quite make sense
Scott,
to me.
Absolutely. Let me explain it to you. It goes right back to the nexus where you said about audits, because we are talking about multi-millions of dollars, perhaps even billions. We don't know how much is going to be spent. But one thing that we know for sure is that we are going to want to know where those dollars are going to be spent. So whether we're talking about housing, whether we're talking about the gas tax, whether we're talking about reproductive rights and education, these are still tax dollars that are going to be dispersed. And the Controller's Office is the one that disperses this money.
So remember that this is a nonpartisan position. It's supposed to be independent of either Democrat or Republican Party. However, Malia Cohen is just playing the Trump card and the abortion card. She's essentially playing partisan politics like a typical career politician. So I suspect that she's just going to pander to her party instead of to the citizens and all of the taxpayers.
This office, as you well know, has quite a bit of power over fiscal matters. How do you want to use that power?
I think we need greater accountability for how the state spends money. I think the office was set up to be a fiscal watchdog, to be an office that would give taxpayers a sense of how their money was being spent, where it was being spent, how effectively it was being spent. And I think that power is very important. Knowledge is power, information is power, and as taxpayers in California, we don't have nearly enough of a sense of where the money goes and how effectively it's spent. I think, unfortunately, that's resulted in some situations where there's been mismanagement, some situations where we haven't been solving problems, and I want to bring transparency and accountability back to Sacramento.
Well, in fact, you've used the phrase radical transparency. What does that mean?
Well, I'll give you an example. We have about $300 billion a year in checks that we cut as a state. The controller is supposed to sign off on each one of those. California is one of the few states where we don't have transparency into the line-by-line ledger, if you will. If you think about a checkbook, we don't have that same kind of transparency in California. They have it in many other states. And what I think we need is some capacity to understand exactly where every dollar is going so that taxpayers can find that information if it's on the internet. I've talked about an app on your phone. That's what I mean by radical transparency, being able to see what your state government is spending money on down to the penny.
So you mentioned, some of the mismanagement, and of course the first thing that comes to mind is EDD, the Employment Development Department, where during the pandemic, tens of billions of dollars got fraudulently received from people who didn't deserve it. As you know, the auditor, the independent auditor, 10 years ago warned about that, and nobody did anything. So what makes you think you, as an outsider, in a sense, could have a bigger impact than the person whose job it was to audit those departments?
The auditor, at the end of the day, doesn't have an independent constituency. The controller is independent from every other official in state government, a constitutionally elected officer whose job it is to make sure we retain accountability for solving problems.
But in fairness, you're right. The auditor works for the legislature, although they serve for a specific amount of time. But she laid out the problem.
Oh, I know.
And they just ignored it.
I know, because no one followed up. And that's part of the problem. The auditor, Elaine Howell, who recently left the job, did a terrific job for our state. And people should recognize all the great things she did. The problem is when you're not independently elected, when you don't have the platform to be able to stand there and say, you have to solve this problem. Hey, legislature, hey, governor, because you're right. We had a process failure. Technology failures, failures in process of how that money got out the door. And when nobody's paying attention, when nobody is willing to hold the insiders and the politicians accountable, that's what happens. You end up with $20 to $30 billion worth of fraud. And here's the thing, Scott, it doesn't have to happen again, but it could if those things don't get fixed. And so it has to be a priority of the next controller to make sure we fix that EDD program once and for all.
Whereas Lanhee Chen, from his answers, you can tell that he's focused on the duties of the position. And his goals are to focus on transparency and to minimize fraud and wasteful spending. Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed our video. If you'd like to support our channel, you can check out our Patreon or buy me a coffee. Be sure to also check out our Instagram and YouTube accounts, and to comment, like, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.